Being a trucker means getting used to endless roads, lonely nights, and that tiredness that never quite goes away. But it also means learning to recognize a bad omen before it happens. That job felt like one of those. I got the offer at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. A tall, skinny guy with a piercing stare approached me while I was finishing my coffee. He didn't introduce himself, just dropped an envelope on the table. I need a driver for a special delivery. Upfront payment. I opened the envelope and saw an absurd amount of cash. More than I'd make in 3 months. What kind of load? I asked, suspicious. He slid a second envelope toward me. Inside was a yellow sheet with a list of rules. 1. Never ask about the load. Just drive. 2. Do not stop the truck unless it's at one of the authorized points. 3. If you hear noises from the cargo area, ignore them. 4. Never open the load, under no circumstances. 5. If you see another truck like yours on the road, do not overtake it. Do not look at the driver. 6. If the radio broadcasts a voice calling your name, turn it off immediately. 7. If you reach the destination and no one comes to collect the load, keep driving until you receive further instructions. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. This feels like a test or a joke. It's a job. You take it or you don't. I swallowed hard. Something inside me was telling me to turn it down. But I needed the money. I'm in. He smiled for the first time. It wasn't a regular smile. Safe travels. That night, I knew that road wasn't like the others. And my biggest mistake was accepting that load. The truck was waiting for me in the yard of an abandoned freight company, far from any main highway. When I arrived, the same man from before was there, standing next to the truck, as if he already knew I'd say yes. The keys in the ignition. The route is programmed in the GPS. Follow the rules, and you'll be fine. He handed me another envelope, smaller than the first. Inside was just a handwritten address and a portable radio. What happens if I break one of the rules? I asked. He just stared at me for a few seconds before giving the truckster a pat. Safe travels. As soon as I climbed into the cab and started the engine, he stepped back, disappearing into the darkness. I should have left right then, but the money was already in my pocket, and it was too late to back out now. The load was locked in a reinforced container. No markings, no labels. It seemed solid. No noise coming from inside. I took a deep breath and drove the truck onto the road. The first few hours were peaceful. The cab radio only played static, so I left it off. The road was straight desolate, cutting through the desert under a moonless sky. That's when I heard the first noise. It came from the cargo hold, a dry sound like something scraping against metal. I remembered rule number 3. If you hear noises from the cargo hold, ignore them. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept going. The sound repeated, scratches, then soft knocks, almost hesitant. I accelerated. Then came the voice. Hey, is anyone there? My heart nearly stopped. The voice was coming from the portable radio the man had given me. The problem was, I'd never turned it on. The voice repeated, now clearer. Can you hear me? It was a woman's voice. Low, raspy, as if she was having trouble speaking. I should have turned off the radio, but instead, I held the device with trembling hands and pressed the transmit button. Who's speaking? Silence. Then a heavy, dragged breath, as if someone was very close to the microphone. Open the load, please. I dropped the radio like it had burned me. Rule number 4, never open the load. Under no circumstances. I glanced in the rear-view mirror. Nothing but the empty road. No cars behind me. No lights on the shoulders. But for a second, I swear I saw something moving in the cargo hold. Something big. Something that knew I was there and wanted out. I drove for a few more hours, trying to ignore the voice on the radio and the sounds from the cargo hold. Every minute felt like it was dragging, and I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my neck. The silence of the road was almost suffocating. The GPS indicated I should keep going straight for another 300 kilometers before the first stop. But then, the dashboard lights began to flicker. The first thing I thought was that it was just an electrical glitch. But then, the radio crackled again. "Can you hear me?" It was the same voice. I refused to answer. I kept my hands firm on the wheel, my eyes fixed on the road. "Help me. It's dark here." My mouth went dry. I knew I couldn't respond, and I knew I couldn't stop. Rule number 6. Never stop the truck on your own. But suddenly, the headlights illuminated something in the middle of the road. Someone was standing there, a woman. Her dress was dirty, torn, and her hair fell over her face, hiding her eyes. She was right in the center of the lane, unmoving. If I didn't brake, I'd hit her. My instinct screamed at me to slam the brakes. But then, something in my mind sounded like an alarm. That woman, she was the same voice from the radio. She wasn't trying to cross the road. She was waiting for me. I forced myself to follow the rule and pressed the accelerator instead of the brake. The truck roared and sped past her. But in the moment I passed, I saw something impossible in the rear-view mirror. She was still there, in the same spot, unmoving. I was already going over 100 kilometers per hour, but she hadn't moved from her spot. That's when the voice on the radio got louder. "Why didn't you stop?" The radio crackled again, and this time, something different happened. The side mirror caught a movement along the side of the cargo, something climbing. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the knuckles turned white. I didn't know what was happening, but one thing was clear. I was no longer alone in that truck. My breath grew heavy. The truck's engine roared loudly, but not loud enough to drown out the sound of whatever was climbing up the side of the cargo hold. A metallic scrape echoed against the body, accompanied by a low, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. Someone or something was banging against the passenger side door. My mind screamed for me not to look, but my instinct did the opposite. I quickly glanced at the rearview mirror. It was a mistake. For a fraction of a second, I saw thin, pale hands gripping the side of the truck. Long, dirty nails dug into the metal, like claws of some animal trying to hold on against the force of the wind. But the worst part was the face. It was the woman from the road. Her hair still covered part of her face. But now, beneath the strands, I saw an impossible smile. A mouth too wide, lips stretched almost to her ears, and small, sharp teeth, like those of a hungry animal. Then, she moved her lips, and, even with the roar of the engine and the wind, I heard her words perfectly. "Open the door." I turned back to the road and slammed my foot on the accelerator. Rule number 3 was clear. Never look directly at anything that tries to get your attention on the road. And I had just broken it. The pounding on the door intensified. Now, the sound was louder, more frantic. The entire truck trembled, as if something was trying to rip the door off. My heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't stop. I couldn't slow down. That's when I heard a loud crack behind me. I looked into the rearview mirror and saw something that took my breath away. The tarp on the cargo hold was being pulled inward. Something was trying to enter the cabin through the cargo compartment. My fingers gripped the wheel, so tightly my nails dug into the rubber. Tap, tap, tap. This time, the sound came from the rear window of the cabin. No. Slowly, I looked into the rear-view mirror again, and there she was. The woman was now inside the cargo hold, kneeling right behind me. The glass separated us, but her empty, black eyes, like a bottomless void, were fixed on mine. She smiled. "You've already broken one rule. How about breaking another?" My blood ran cold. Then, she began to crawl toward me. Panic coursed through my body like an electric shock. The woman crawled toward the rear window of the cabin, her limbs folding in unnatural ways, as if her bones had broken or never existed. Her black eyes gleamed in the dark, locked onto me with a sick, hungry gaze. "You've already broken one rule. How about breaking another? Her lips moved again, but this time, what I heard didn't come from her mouth. The words echoed in my head. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Focus on the road. Don't look. Don't stop. Don't listen. Those were the rules. I'd already broken one, but if I broke another, she smiled wider, and then she disappeared. The rear view mirror now reflected nothing but the dark emptiness of the cargo hold. My stomach churned. She was gone, but I knew she was still there. Tap, tap, tap. The banging returned, this time on the roof of the cab. My heart was pounding like a drum in my chest. Each thud made my vision darken around the edges. Sweat was running from my forehead into my eyes, but I couldn't blink. I couldn't afford to blink. My mind screamed at me to speed up, but the needle on the speedometer was already dangerously high. If I pushed past that limit, the curves in the road could kill me before that thing did. Then I saw the headlights of another truck in the rearview mirror. Not an ordinary truck. It was the same truck as before, the one that disappeared in the middle of nowhere. Its headlights were on, but its cargo hold and cabin were just dark shadows on the road. It was following me, and it was getting closer, fast. My heart leapt into my throat. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. Then, like a whisper in my head, I heard, "Slow down." My vision blurred for a second. The sound of the engine seemed distant. Slow down. The voice was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Slow down and let me in. That thing wanted me to stop, wanted me to break another rule. I was shaking. My mind fought against the sickening urge to take my foot off the gas. But then I remembered the last rule. If something tries to convince you to stop, keep going. No matter what happens. My teeth clenched, and then I slammed my foot on the accelerator. The roar of the engine echoed, the cabin vibrating with the sudden acceleration. The road ahead of me warped as the truck shot forward. But I could feel the weight of the presence behind me, getting closer. Tap, tap, tap. The knocks on the roof didn't stop, echoing like a nightmare song. The feeling that something or someone was about to invade my cabin was overwhelming. I knew I had to keep going, but the pressure was unbearable. Every second felt like an eternity, my vision blurring more and more, and the air thick and hot. Don't stop. Don't look. Don't listen. The words of the rules hammered in my mind. If I slowed down, if I broke another rule, there would be no turning back. I didn't know what would happen, but I could feel it wouldn't be something I could survive. The headlights of the truck behind me started to enlarge, as if they were growing, coming toward me with a supernatural speed. I was on the edge, the sound of the engine now turning into a cacophony of muffled and metallic screams, as if the truck itself was distorting, changing. The road ahead seemed endless, but the fear of what was behind me made everything even more confusing. I felt trapped in some sort of loop, as if the road, the truck, and I were being pulled to a place where the rules didn't apply. And then, the light of the truck's headlights lit up the rearview mirror. I looked, and I saw. It was her, the woman. Now, she was there, reflected in the glass of the rearview mirror, her eyes glowing unnaturally, and her smile stretching grotesquely. She was standing in the middle of the road, as if waiting for something. I didn't dare look any longer. My eyes locked back on the road ahead, but the feeling that she was there behind me, following every move I made, didn't fade. "Let me in," the voice hissed, crawling through the cracks of my mind as if it wanted to take control. I felt a growing pain in my chest, the sensation of being devoured from within. But I knew that if I let her, if I allowed her, she would take control of everything. The road started to blur, as if the asphalt was melting beneath the wheels, and then my vision completely distorted. The trees along the road seemed to stretch toward the truck, their shadows twisting in impossible ways. That's when I realized I was no longer alone on the road. There were more trucks now, all with their headlights on, coming toward me. And I knew with a terrifying clarity that they weren't ordinary vehicles. They were shadows, like the truck following me, empty, lifeless. I was no longer running from the woman. I was running from all of them. "You've already broken a rule." The woman whispered again, and this time, her voice was inside my head, louder, more present. "Now! There's only one thing left to do." My breathing was erratic. I could no longer tell the road from the darkness around me. Fear overtook me, but at the same time, something inside of me resisted. It wasn't just my life at stake. It was my sanity, my very essence. I looked to the side. The truck door was slightly open, a crack in the jungle of shadows surrounding me. And in the reflection of the glass, I saw the woman again, closer, more real than before. "Let me in," but I already knew the answer. Without thinking, I jerked the wheel to the right, throwing the truck off the road. The impact was brutal. The world turned upside down, the trees becoming smears, the ground rising around me, and then darkness consumed me. The impact was like thunder. The truck flipped, rolling through the hills of dirt and stones. The metallic sound of pieces shattering echoing in my head. The engine's roar slowly died, mixed with the sound of my own body being crushed against the seat and the walls of the cabin. When the dust settled, I was still conscious, but my vision was blurry. My body felt 3 times its weight, and my heart was beating erratically. My hands were tightly gripping the wheel, as if it was the only thing holding me to reality. But the feeling that something was wrong never faded. None of this seemed real. What was left of the cabin was silent. The sound of the wind passing through the cracks in the metal and the muffled sound of my breathing were the only echoes. And then the voice. "You thought you could escape." I knew who it was. The woman. She was there, somewhere, watching, waiting. Her presence was still inside me, in my mind, like poison. I wanted to scream, but the pain was unbearable. I was trapped. "Now! You'll let me in." I wanted to fight. I wanted to resist. But each word of hers rooted itself deeper, like a sharp blade cutting away my will to fight. And suddenly, the world fell apart around me. The cabin, the trees, the road, everything disappeared. I was back to the beginning, on the same road I had never finished traveling. Except now, she was everywhere, not just behind me, not just in the rear view. She was inside, around me, in my head. And the road no longer seemed real. There was no path to follow anymore. The truck was empty, the cabin cold and desolate. I was alone, but at the same time I wasn't. The woman, the voice, the darkness, everything had consumed me, and there was no escape. I looked ahead, but there was no more road, just the abyss. And then she entered,